Many years ago, in a quiet village, life was simple and the fields were lush and green. The villagers lived peaceful, ordinary lives until that dreadful night. That night, a pregnant villager named Zhang Xulan went into labor. She was in terrible pain, rolling on the bed. Her husband, Liu Deju, panicked and ran to fetch the village midwife, Old Wang. Old Wang was in her 60s, an experienced midwife known for her skills. People called her the living goddess of childbirth. Old Wang arrived at Zhang's house with her worn-out midwife box. She carefully comforted Xulan while opening her box, revealing old tools wrapped in cloth, yellowing scissors and rusted needles that made everyone uneasy. The room smelled strongly of bitter herbs, and Xulan's groans filled the air. Outside, the wind howled, almost like it was whispering. Liu Deju paced anxiously outside, occasionally poking his head into the room. Old Wang kept working while muttering, "The baby is coming, Xulan. Hold on." Time passed slowly, and it was midnight when Old Wang's expression grew increasingly serious. Xulan was already unconscious from the pain, as if something was stuck inside her, refusing to come out. Old Wang felt an ominous feeling in her heart, but said nothing, just worked faster. Suddenly, a piercing scream broke the silence of the night. Xulan finally gave birth to the thing, but when Old Wang looked at the baby, her face turned pale. It wasn't a baby at all, but a creature covered in black scales. Its eyes were wide open, with blood-red pupils, like two burning flames. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth, and it let out a low growl like a wild beast. Its body was covered with strange lumps, each looking like an eye staring at the world. Old Wang was so terrified she almost dropped her scissors. She shook violently, as if her soul had left her. Liu Deju heard the scream and rushed into the room. When he saw the creature, his legs went weak, and he collapsed to the ground. The room fell into dead silence, except for the creature's low growling, which echoed eerily, as if mocking their ignorance and fear. Old Wang tried desperately to calm herself. Her trembling hands grabbed the scissors, attempting to cut the umbilical cord, hoping to save Xulan. But the creature suddenly opened its eyes wide, let out a sharp shriek, then lunged forward and bit down on Old Wang's wrist. Old Wang screamed miserably, blood spurting everywhere. She struggled desperately. But the creature was incredibly strong, its eyes full of malice, looking like a demon from hell. Seeing this, Liu Deju was scared out of his mind. He stumbled to his feet shouting, "Help! Help!" His cries echoed through the village at night, but no one dared to come out. He ran for his life, the creature chasing after him, biting his leg. But he managed to escape and collapsed at the edge of the village, unconscious. The whole night, Xulan's house was filled with the creature's growls and screams of terror. By dawn, everything had gone quiet. In the morning, the villagers found Liu Deju unconscious at the village entrance, his legs covered in blood. They quickly brought him home. After hearing his broken account, the villagers finally gathered the courage to go to Xulan's house, and the scene left them stunned. The room was covered in blood. Old Wang's body lay on the floor, her wrist bitten off. Xulan was lifeless on the bed, her face frozen in agony. The creature was nowhere to be found. Only bloodstains and a foul stench remained. Though Liu Deju survived, his leg was left crippled and he lost his mind. He stayed with his parents, often wandering around the village, shouting, "Come on, I'll hit you with a shovel." Perhaps madness was a mercy for him after all. No one in the village ever dared to speak of that night again. Xulan's house was sealed off, and people took detours rather than pass by it. It was said that late at night, low growls could still be heard coming from Xulan's house, and people believed the creature was still lurking nearby. This story also happened in a small village, surrounded by mountains with no easy way in or out. The villagers worked at sunrise and rested at sunset, living simple and peaceful lives. Until one day, a mysterious drifter showed up, and everything started to change. The drifter was a thin, scraggly, middle-aged man wearing a tattered gray coat. There was a strange light in his eyes that no one could explain. Nobody knew where he came from, and he never spoke. He just wandered around the village. At first, the villagers were wary of him. But since he didn't do anything bad, over time, they stopped paying much attention to him. One night, a young woman named Ying suddenly had terrible stomach pain, so bad she almost passed out. She was ready to give birth, and her husband, Hu, was in a panic. He quickly went to get Uncle Li, the village doctor. Uncle Li checked on Ying and found that something was very wrong. The baby seemed to be moving wildly inside her, and Ying was sweating in pain. Just then, the mysterious drifter showed up at Ying's door. He stood there and spoke in a hoarse voice. "Let me help you." Hu hesitated, but seeing how much pain his wife was in, he had no choice but to agree. The drifter walked into the room and took out a small black bottle from his coat. It contained a liquid that had a strange smell. He motioned for Ying to drink it. Ying was in so much pain that she couldn't speak, and with her husband's help, she managed to drink the liquid. Soon, Ying seemed to be in less pain, but the air in the room grew colder and colder, giving everyone a creepy feeling. The drifter put his hand on Ying's belly and started chanting in a low, strange voice. As he chanted, Ying's belly began to move violently, like something inside was struggling to get out. Hu was terrified. He looked at his wife's belly, and he could see it bulging, like a little hand was pressing against the skin, trying to come out. The drifter's chanting got faster and more intense, while Ying's groans grew weaker, as if she was losing consciousness. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, and a foul-smelling liquid burst out of Ying's belly. Then, a strange creature crawled out. It looked like some kind of weird plant, with dark green leaves and vines all over its body. The vines twisted and moved as if they were searching for something. It had no eyes, but on top, there was a giant, strange flower. The petals slowly opened, revealing something that looked like a mouth, making a deep humming sound, as if it was answering a call. When the drifter saw the creature, he smiled in a strange way. He gently patted the creature's vines, and it seemed to recognize him. The vines wrapped around the drifter's hand, almost like they were showing affection. Hu was too scared to say anything, and just stood there, staring at the drifter and the creature. "It is my child," the drifter said softly, "and your curse." Then he picked up the creature, turned, and walked out of Ying's house, disappearing into the night, leaving behind Hu and a dying Ying. The next day, word spread that Ying had passed away. People talked about what had happened that night, but no one really knew. The drifter and his child were never seen again. But after that, strange things kept happening in the village. Cows and sheep would disappear for no reason, and late at night, people could hear what sounded like a baby crying somewhere far away. Near my house, there was a small market that had been running for decades. Though it wasn't large, it had everything from fresh fruits and vegetables to daily household items. My mom would go there at least twice a week. Even when my grandma was still working, she used to shop there often and became friends with the stall owners, especially the fish seller, Mr. Lau, and his family. They were always kind and helpful, and over time, they became very close to us. Every time we walked into the market, the air was filled with the mixed smells of fish, vegetables, and the lively chatter of people. It was the perfect picture of everyday life. Mr. Lau's fish stall was in the southeast corner of the market. The floor was always wet, covered with water splashes, and the ice counter was full of different kinds of fish, from carp to catfish and even sea fish. Whenever the fish moved a little on the ice, the cold air and water would splash, making the stall seem alive. Mr. Lau wore rubber gloves, picked up a wooden mallet, and knocked out the fish before cutting it open with a sharp knife, scaling, gutting, and cleaning it in one smooth motion. His actions were so practiced that it looked almost like a dance. He knew every detail of his work, and decades of experience made his skills mesmerizing to watch. Mr. Lau's son, Guangping, who was also Niu Niu's father, was his right-hand man and the future owner of the stall. Guangping inherited his father's hard-working nature and calmness. He was always smiling and worked in an organized way. He was strong, and his hands moved quickly and skillfully while scaling or cleaning fish. Customers often praised his skills. Everyone in the market knew him as a family man, always kind to his wife and doting on his daughter. Whenever he had the time, he would pick up Niu Niu and me from school. Niu Niu was my classmate, and we were as close as sisters. Every day after school, I would often run to the fish stall, either to help or to play with Niu Niu. She would always stand next to her dad and grandpa, watching them handle the fish, her eyes full of curiosity. Sometimes, she would even pick up a small knife and try to scale the fish like the adults, her serious face making her look adorable. Mr. Lau and Guangping would often guide her with a smile, teaching her how to hold the knife steadily without hurting herself. The peaceful days passed like this, filled with the warmth of the market. In my memory, the entire market was filled with our laughter, and it seemed like this life would continue forever. However, everything changed on a rainy night. That night, Mr. Lau, his wife, Guangping's wife, and a young helper at the stall named Shrimp, a 20-year-old guy, were all killed by Guangping. Only Niu survived because her bed was close to the door. She woke up during the chaos and escaped, running into the street, crying for help, until a passerby found her and called the police. When I heard the news, I was so shocked I could hardly breathe. The scenes of our daily life kept replaying in my head, but now everything was shattered. After the incident, I couldn't accept what had happened, and I wasn't able to see Niu. I only heard that she had been sent to a mental hospital, traumatized and unable to remember the details of that night clearly. Police said her descriptions were scattered and filled with fear. From the initial investigation and Niu's fragmented memories, it seemed that around 10 o'clock that night, Guangping suddenly changed. It was as if he had been possessed. His eyes became empty and cold. He picked up a fish knife and attacked his parents while they were sleeping. His wife heard the noise, ran to see what was happening and screamed, but she was also killed shortly after. The young helper, Shrimp, tried to stop him but couldn't escape his fate. After the killings, Guangping didn't run. He just sat there in the pool of blood, expressionless, like he was possessed by a demon. I felt heartbroken for Niu's family, and I couldn't stop questioning why. How could Guangping, who was always gentle and loved his family, become so violent overnight? Was he really possessed, like the rumor said? Driven by a strong sense of curiosity, I decided to find out the truth. One night, I snuck into the small house where the incident happened. The house was sealed off by the police, but Niu and I used to play there, so I knew every corner. I carefully climbed over the wall and entered the yard. The furniture inside was the same, though there were still some bloodstains on the floor, cordoned off by yellow and white tape. There was a lingering, uneasy smell in the air. On the table, there were 2 pink candles. One of them was half burned. I suddenly remembered Niu telling me that her dad had brought these candles from a faraway place. They had a special scent that would fill the whole room when lit. Thinking of Niu's smiling face, I felt a pang of sadness and couldn't help lighting the candle. A pale green flame flickered to life, and soon the room was filled with a sweet, strange scent. I began to feel dizzy, my body slightly hot, and my vision blurred. Suddenly, the whole room seemed to change. The lights dimmed, the walls seemed to ooze blood, and I could hear sharp cries. Then I saw them, Mr. Lau and his family. Their faces were twisted, their eyes hollow, and their mouths held eerie smiles. Each of them held a sharp axe, and they moved slowly towards me, their expressions full of hatred, as if questioning why I had come. I was so scared that I collapsed on the floor, unable to scream or run, just watching them get closer, my heart almost stopping. Just as I was about to faint from fear, I heard Captain Chi shout, "Get out now!" I felt someone pulling me out of the house, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed with my parents and Captain Chi by my side. I shakily told them what I had seen in the small house, convinced that Guangping's actions were not his own, but that he had been controlled by some evil force. Captain Chi listened with a serious expression and just told me to rest, leaving everything else to the police. A few days later, Captain Chi told us that they had received a report about someone illegally entering the crime scene. When they arrived, they found me mumbling and out of my mind, acting just like Guangping had been described at the crime scene. Captain Chi realized something was wrong and immediately ordered a detailed examination of the scene, especially the 2 pink candles I had lit. The police lab analysis found that the candles contained a rare plant extract, a hallucinogen that came from a tropical plant. This hallucinogen could cause extreme hallucinations in a short time, making people lose control and become violent. Wow. In a closed room, the concentration of this substance could easily reach dangerous levels. Captain Chi explained, "We found that Guangping lit the candles that night. the hallucinogen entered his body through breathing, causing him to have hallucinations and mistakenly think his family was a threat, which led to his extreme actions. Your behavior was identical to Guangping's, which is how we discovered the problem with the candles. Hearing this, I had mixed feelings. I had thought it was a supernatural event, that some curse or ghost was at work, but the truth was even harsher. Guangping wasn't possessed. He was an unknowing victim of those hallucinogenic candles, driven to madness and violence by what he saw. After the truth came out, I never had the courage to return to the house. Case was finally closed, and 6 months later, Niu was preparing to move back to her hometown with her uncle's family. On the day of her departure, we hugged each other in silence at the station, unable to find the right words to say. Life had to go on, but the warmth and laughter of that little house would never return. Before we start, please click subscribe to support the channel. This story was told by an elder in my family. It happened in a place called Bi Mao Village more than 30 years ago. One late autumn night, something very strange happened in the village. The wind howled, and the moon was covered by thick clouds, making the night completely dark. Suddenly, they heard cries coming from Li's house. The Li family was one of the wealthier families in the village. Mr. Li had a 7-year-old son named Ji and a 5-year-old daughter named Mei. That night, Ji suddenly got a high fever, and his body temperature was terrifyingly high. Mr. Li and his wife were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. In their desperation, they called the village's only village healer. The village healer was quite aged, with a face full of wrinkles that seemed to tell many stories. He had no family of his own and made a living by treating people in the village. He came to Li's house, carefully checked Yi's condition, and frowned even more deeply. He said in a low voice,
"This isn't an ordinary illness. It seems like something has latched onto the child."
Hearing this, Mr. Li's heart jumped to his throat. People in the countryside believed in these things. He suddenly remembered that a few days ago, Jie had played in the wasteland outside the village and later said that he dreamed of a little girl who told him she couldn't find her way home and asked Jia to help her. At the time, Mr. Li thought it was just a child's imagination and didn't take it seriously. But now, hearing what the village healer said, he felt a surge of fear and didn't know what to do. The village healer took some willow leaves from his medicine box and asked Mr. Li to bring a bowl of clean water. He gently stirred the water with the willow leaves and then had Jia drink it. After drinking it, Jia gradually calmed down and his fever started to subside. The old doctor warned Mr. Li and his wife, "Do not let the child go near the wasteland again in the coming days. That place is not clean." However, the matter did not end there. 3 days later, Jia's illness returned, and it was even worse than before. He curled up in the corner of the bed, his eyes filled with terror, muttering repeatedly,
"She's here. She wants me to take her home."
This time, even the old doctor was powerless. He could only shake his head and sigh, saying,
"This child might really be haunted by something. I know medicine, but I do not know the ways of the spirits."
Just as everyone was at their wits' end, a stranger arrived in the village. He was a young Taoist priest, wearing a clean robe and carrying an old cloth bag. He introduced himself as a disciple of the Mao Mountain sect. He said he had been passing by when he was attracted by the unusual energy in the village. Let me explain a bit about the Mao Mountain sect. It is said to have originated in the Eastern Jin dynasty, named after Mao Mountain. Mao Mountain has long been a sacred place for Taoism. The Taoists of Mao Mountain are known for their skills in exorcism and the use of talismans, and they can communicate with both the living and the dead. This priest introduced himself simply as Taoist Zhang. His master was an elder of the Mao Mountain sect, skilled in exorcism. Zhang had been trained on Mao Mountain since he was a child, learning many mystical arts. This time, he had come down from the mountain to spread Taoism. Taoist Zhang sat down in the Li family's main room, lit 3 sticks of incense, closed his eyes, and meditated for a while. Then he suddenly opened his eyes and said,
"This child is being haunted by a restless ghost, a wandering spirit who died in the wasteland outside the village and cannot find its way home."
After saying this, Zhang took a yellow talisman from his bag and gently placed it on Jia's forehead. Jia suddenly started trembling, as if he had seen something extremely frightening. He screamed loudly and then fainted. Taoist Zhang told Mr. Li and his wife that they must take Jia to the wasteland and let him personally guide the ghost home. They also needed to perform a ritual for this lost spirit so her soul could finally rest. That night, Mr. Li, his wife, and the Taoist Zhang brought the unconscious Jia to the wasteland outside the village. The night was dark and the cold wind blew fiercely. The wasteland looked especially eerie, and rustling sounds came from the grass as if countless eyes were watching them from the darkness. Taoist Zhang placed a stick of incense in the center of the wasteland and began to chant a secret spell of the Mao Mountain sect. It was an ancient incantation said to guide lost spirits to find their way home. Suddenly, Ji opened his eyes in his dream. His gaze was empty, as if he was no longer himself, like he had lost his soul. He stood up and slowly walked towards a low area in the wasteland. Mr. Li and his wife followed closely, their faces filled with fear and anxiety. Jia stopped in front of a small, simple grave, covered mostly by weeds, with no name or marker. Zhang performed a ritual at the grave, lighting a yellow talisman and chanting softly. Suddenly, the talisman burst into blue flames. He asked softly,
"Spirit, who are you? Why are you here?"
After a moment, a cold breeze seemed to sweep past them, and a faint voice echoed in the wind.
I am Ping. I have waited here for so long. I can't find my way home.
Mr. Li's face turned pale as he heard the name. This was the name of the girl who went missing from the village years ago. Her parents had waited for her for so long, but their health declined over the years. The villagers all thought Ping had been taken by traffickers, but no one knew her body had been buried here all along. Zhang nodded and said,
Ping, do not worry. I will help you find peace.
Zhang instructed Mr. Li and his wife to kneel before the grave and bow, asking Ping's spirit for forgiveness. He then took out incense and paper money from his bag and began the ritual for Ping. Zhang chanted Taoist prayers to send the spirit to the afterlife. The firelight flickered in the darkness of the night, illuminating the path to the other side. Zhang said,
Heaven and earth are just, yin and yang in harmony. I, Zhang of Mao Mountain, humbly ask the heavenly spirits to guide this lost soul. May you return to your rightful place and find eternal peace. Tonight, I light this incense for you, paving the way for your soul. May you no longer linger in the suffering of this world.
Suddenly, a cold wind blew, and Mr. Li felt a small, icy hand hold his own. He shivered, but nothing was visible.
Thank you. I can finally go where I should be.
A gentle voice echoed in the wind. Tears instantly welled up in Mr. Li and his wife's eyes. They watched as the fire before the grave slowly went out, as if the lingering resentment had finally faded away with the wind. Taoist Zhang said that the spirit had found peace and would no longer linger in the wasteland. The next day, Ping's parents came to the village, and they reburied her remains properly. From that day on, Jia miraculously recovered. He no longer had nightmares and never mentioned the little girl again. The villagers also began to avoid the wasteland, and no one dared to play there anymore. This story was told by my grandma. I'm not sure if it's true. Whenever I asked, she'd just say, "Kids shouldn't ask too many questions." It happened in the 90s, and it was a big deal in the small town back then when my grandma's sister's son and daughter-in-law both died suddenly. The story begins 15 years before the couple's death on a cold winter night. Their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, went missing. Her parents, Lee and May, put up countless missing person posters all over the town, calling her name, searching for her with the police and friends. But all efforts were in vain, and gradually, the neighbors' comforting words faded away, and people began to accept this tragedy. Everyone assumed that Lily was taken by traffickers. For Lee and May, Lily's disappearance was a wound that never healed, and even 15 years later, it still hurt deeply. Over the years, the couple lived a miserable life. They never had another child. Lee worked at a gas station, and May was an accountant at a kindergarten. After the incident, they both became quiet and withdrawn, rarely socializing. May's mother-in-law, Lily's grandmother, felt heartbroken seeing them like this, but whenever she thought of her missing granddaughter, she couldn't bring herself to smile either. I remember my grandma also helped in searching for Lily during those years. Lee and May felt guilty and afraid, always blaming themselves for not taking better care of their daughter. They couldn't truly face each other, and their relationship became distant and cold. Though life went on, they were tormented by nightmares and guilt every night, especially when they saw those missing person posters still hanging on the walls, weighing heavily on their hearts. 15 years later, on what would have been Lily's birthday, something strange happened. That night, the couple, who rarely sat together for dinner, were eating when the phone suddenly rang. May put down her chopsticks, her eyes filled with confusion. The phone was newly installed, and hardly anyone knew the number, so she picked it up puzzled.
Hello? Mom? Dad?
A trembling young girl's voice came from the other end. May froze, her hand shaking so much she almost dropped the phone. The voice was so familiar, as if it had traveled from 15 years ago. It was Lily's voice. Lily? May's voice was barely a whisper, filled with doubt and a hint of fear.
It's me, Mom.
The voice was choked with emotion, as if it had crossed a vast distance and time. Lee hurried over, staring at his wife in the phone, his heart pounding and his face turning pale. He shook his head instinctively. It couldn't be. How could Lily be calling them? On the other end of the line, there was static, like someone softly sobbing.
Mom? Dad? Why did you leave me? Do you know I've been looking for you all this time?
May's heart felt like it was being squeezed, and she could barely breathe. She looked at Lee, who was covering his mouth with his hand, his eyes filled with disbelief and fear. Lily, we thought you were... May's voice trembled, unable to finish her sentence. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a cold laugh.
You thought I was dead? No, Mom and Dad, I've been watching you. Watching you live, watching you eat, watching you go on with every day without me.
May gasped, her fingers trembling as she hung up the phone. Lee quickly grabbed her shoulders. It can't be. It must be some kind of prank. Lee's voice was also trembling, but more like he was trying to convince himself. Just then, the doorbell rang. They looked at each other, their hearts seeming to stop. Who would visit at this hour? They had become used to staying home and rarely had visitors, especially at night. Lee forced down his fear, walked to the door, and put his hand on the doorknob. The cold wind seeped through the gap, chilling his fingers. When he opened the door, there stood a girl who looked exactly like Lily, even wearing the same red coat she had on when she disappeared.
Mom, Dad, I'm back.
The girl smiled, her voice playful and clear, still sounding like a child. May collapsed to the floor, tears blurring her vision. Lee's lips trembled, unable to speak. Suddenly, the girl's smile vanished, replaced by a look of hatred.
Why did you do it? Why did you leave me in that freezing lake? Why push me? Did you think I would forgive you?
Her voice rose from a whisper to a sharp scream, cutting straight to the soul. Dark memories flashed through Lee's mind, those suppressed moments coming back to life. It was a cold night when Lily ran out after being scolded for her poor grades. They had chased after her and found her by the lake, but she refused to come home. The argument escalated. In a fit of rage, May lost control and pushed Lily. They watched in horror as she fell into the icy water. They froze, unable to move, as they saw her struggling in the lake. The slope to the lake was steep, and within a minute or two, she disappeared beneath the water. They scrambled down to search, but the lake soon turned calm, and they couldn't find her. For some reason, they didn't call the police. Everything seemed frozen, and in the biting cold, they decided to cover up the truth, pretending that Lily had simply gone missing. Now, seeing this figure before them, those dreadful memories resurfaced, becoming vivid once again. Lee increasingly felt that this wasn't an illusion, but that their past had somehow come back to haunt them. The girl slowly approached them, her face twisted into a strange smile, her lips moving as if whispering something. "Are you ready to come with me?" A sudden gust of wind blew out the lights in the house, plunging everything into darkness. May and Lee's screams echoed through the house, then everything fell silent. The next morning, neighbors found Lee and May's door wide open. They were both lying dead on the floor. The police were called, but with limited technology at the time, they concluded it was sudden cardiac arrest, possibly from fright. In that empty house, the only thing left was the old missing person poster on the wall, swaying slightly in the wind, Lily's smile seeming to follow every visitor, her lips curved in a strange, indescribable way. Later, the police found a diary in Lee's house, kept in a cookie tin, along with important items like bank books and keys. The diary detailed what had happened to Lily that night and ended with the couple's acknowledgement that they knew it wasn't over, that they would eventually face retribution. Yi was a young woman who loved looking beautiful and especially enjoyed collecting different kinds of wigs. One day, at a flea market, she came across a black wig that gave her an inexplicable urge. The wig lay quietly in a corner of the stall, with long, thick black hair cascading down, the strands smooth and shiny. It seemed to have an irresistible allure, drawing Yi's eyes and making it impossible for her to look away. "Miss, this wig looks just like real hair. You can give it a try," said the stall owner, a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s, with a hoarse voice and an overly enthusiastic tone. Without much thought, Yi picked up the wig and compared it to herself in a small mirror. It was beautiful, and Yi immediately fell in love with its gorgeous hair. She decided to buy it without hesitation. The owner packed the wig into a box, and Yi put it in her backpack, feeling quite pleased. She never imagined that this simple decision would bring an endless nightmare into her life. When Yi got home, she couldn't wait to take the wig out. She stood in front of the mirror and carefully put it on her head. The wig fit very naturally to her scalp, almost as if it had been custom-made for her. She looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't help but smile. It looked great, making her entire demeanor more attractive. The wig gave her an alluring aura, and she decided to wear it to a friend's party the next evening. That night at the party, Yi received praise from everyone. Her friends all said that her new hairstyle was stunning, and the hair looked especially beautiful. Yi was thrilled to hear all these compliments. She loved the attention. It felt like the wig had given her a renewed sense of confidence. However, as the party came to an end, Yi felt a dull ache on her scalp, like something was gripping her hair tightly. She instinctively pressed her head, but the pain only grew stronger. She frowned, but didn't think too much about it, assuming it was just because the wig was too tight. When she got home, she hurriedly took off the wig, but the tightness and pain didn't go away. She put the wig back into its box, but as she was doing so, she noticed a faint smell. It was like raw meat, mixed with a metallic, bloody odor. She frowned, thinking it was probably her imagination. Exhausted, she went to bed, deciding to take a closer look the next day. That night, Yi had a terrible nightmare. She dreamt she was standing in a dark room, with a damp and putrid smell all around her. There was an old cracked mirror in front of her, and her reflection was blurry. She could only make out that she was still wearing the wig. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the mirror. The skin was pale, the nails were sharp, and it grabbed her hair, pulling hard, as if trying to drag her into the mirror. Yi wanted to struggle, but she found herself unable to move. The pain in her scalp was excruciating, like countless needles stabbing into her head, a pain so intense that she almost passed out. She screamed and woke up, covered in cold sweat, her fingers trembling as she touched her scalp. To her horror, her scalp still ached, and she noticed several strands of hair on her pillow. She felt a wave of inexplicable fear, but she told herself it was just a nightmare that was far too real. The next day, Yi decided to tell her boyfriend, Alan, about what had been happening. Alan had always been very caring, and they had been together for 3 years, talking about marriage. Yi described her recent strange experiences, especially the eerie feeling the wig gave her. "This sounds really off," Alan frowned. "Maybe there's something wrong with the wig. Let's go find the stall owner and ask." They decided to go back to the flea market to find the stall owner who had sold Yi the wig. "Sir, do you remember selling me this wig a few days ago?" Yi asked directly. The stall owner squinted, seemingly trying hard to recall. After a moment, he nodded and replied, "Oh, of course, I remember. Is there a problem?" Alan quickly asked about the origin of the wig. The stall owner said someone had sold it to him at a low price. The man seemed eager to get rid of it, and since the price was cheap, the stall owner didn't ask many questions. Do you know who sold it to you? Alan pressed further. The stall owner shook his head. I don't know him. He didn't seem to want to reveal anything about himself. He was dressed shabbily, and his face was hidden under a hat. I couldn't see him clearly. Hearing this, Yi felt even more uneasy. We should just throw it away, Yi said quietly. She only wanted to get rid of this terrifying thing as soon as possible. Alan was silent for a while, then shook his head. No, we can't just throw it away. If it really has a problem, it could end up harming someone else. We need to find a way to destroy it. Yi nodded. She knew Alan was right. They had to find a way to get rid of the wig completely. Alan came up with an idea. He had heard of a paranormal expert named Dr. Lee, who had years of experience in this field and had helped many people resolve supernatural problems. After some inquiries, Alan finally got Dr. Lee's contact information and arranged a meeting. When Yi and Alan entered Dr. Lee's home, they saw many strange objects. One wall was even covered with animal specimens. Dr. Lee was an elderly man, nearly 60, with thick glasses. He listened carefully as Yi and Alan described what had been happening. His face grew more and more serious as he stared at the wig. He said he needed some time to study it and asked them to leave it with him, promising to contact them once he had any news. A few days later, Alan received a call from Dr. Lee, asking them to come over immediately. When they arrived, Dr. Lee looked even more solemn. I've spent some time investigating the wig thoroughly, Dr. Lee said. I performed some ancient rituals to try and communicate with the spirit attached to it. It definitely carries an intense grudge, and its origin really shocked me. Dr. Lee opened a thick notebook filled with symbols and notes. He pointed at a sketch and said, "This spirit seemed to have been treated very cruelly during her life. Through the ritual, I learned that she was a young woman who was kidnapped, tortured, and eventually had her scalp brutally removed before her death. This wig was made from her scalp, and her grudge is deeply embedded in it." Yi's face turned pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't believe she had been wearing a dead person's scalp. The feeling of disgust and fear almost overwhelmed her. Dr. Lee continued, "The spirit's resentment is deep. She cannot rest in peace, and she's using this wig to try and find a new host, passing her pain onto others. I can feel her hatred. She wants revenge and wants others to experience her suffering." "What should we do now?" Alan asked anxiously. Dr. Lee thought for a moment, then said solemnly, "The only way is to burn it, but it must be done in a remote place to avoid any backlash. Also, you need to use holy water to ensure the spirit is put to rest." He took a small bottle of holy water from a cabinet and handed it to Alan. "Be very careful during the burning. The process might not be easy," Dr. Lee warned. Alan nodded firmly. "We'll be careful." Night fell, and in an open field on the outskirts of town, Yi and Alan lit a bonfire. The flames danced in the darkness, illuminating their tense faces. Alan took out the wig, looked at Yi, and gently squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, everything will be all right." Yi nodded, took a deep breath, and threw the wig into the fire. The flames quickly surrounded the wig, but strangely, it didn't burn as expected. Instead, it writhed as if it were alive, like something inside was resisting the fire. In the flickering light, the wig gradually formed a twisted face, a face full of hatred and pain, with eyes that stared directly at Yi. She could hear low sobbing again, like the ghost was crying out in anguish. Within minutes, the flames began to weaken, as if some dark force was fighting back, trying to escape. Yi felt a surge of intense fear and clung tightly to Alan's hand, almost unable to breathe. Alan quickly opened the bottle of holy water and poured it over the wig. The moment the holy water touched the wig, a sharp, piercing scream rang out, as if it were directly stabbing into their minds, chilling them to the bone. The wig twisted violently in the fire and then began to burn rapidly, eventually turning to ashes. The flames roared back to life, and Yi and Alan finally breathed a sigh of relief. Yi collapsed onto the ground, tears streaming down her face. Alan knelt beside her and gently held her. "It's over. It's all over." After the wig was destroyed, Yi's life gradually returned to normal. Her complexion improved, and she no longer looked so pale and weak. She knew she had finally rid herself of that nightmare and could once again live a normal life. However, one night, as she was brushing her hair in front of the mirror in her bedroom, she suddenly felt a chill. She instinctively looked up at the mirror, and although everything seemed normal, She couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was as if a shadow had flickered in the corner of the mirror. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and looked again. Nothing. She shook her head and muttered, "Maybe I'm just imagining things." But at that moment, she felt a chill creep down her spine, as if the spirit had never really left, still watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return to her life.
The story took place in a remote mountain village in the past century, surrounded by green hills and clear streams, with winding paths through the fields. At night it was usually quiet except for the occasional croak of frogs or a dog's bark. The villagers lived simple lives, relying on farming and hunting, and everyone had close relationships. Life seemed peaceful and tranquil here. However, the villagers were wary of anything supernatural, and the elders often told stories about the soul-locking spirits at dusk to warn children not to roam around at night. Chu was the village's brave and skilled hunter, recognized for his courage and talent despite his young age. Every morning he would carry his bow and arrows into the forest and return at dusk with his catch. The old villagers often said that there were things in the mountains that shouldn't be disturbed. Though Q wasn't fully convinced, he was careful not to ask too much, half believing the warnings. That night it was just past midnight when Chu awoke from his sleep. He felt discomfort in his stomach and decided to go outside. The mountain night was particularly quiet, and the darkness was heavy, with only the sound of wind passing through the pine trees, making the shadows sway like layers of a black curtain. Chu grabbed his oil lamp and lit it, the dim light appearing lonely in the darkness. He hesitated for a moment, but still carefully walked toward the courtyard gate. As he approached the gate, just as he was about to push it open, he heard a soft, intermittent crying nearby. It sounded like a child crying, carrying a chilling feeling. Chu stopped, listening closely. The sound was faint and erratic, seemingly coming from Aunt Lee's house nearby. Who would let their child wander around crying at this hour? Chu frowned, puzzled. He planned to ignore it, but the crying kept echoing in his ears, making him restless. Muttering to himself, he pushed open the gate and tiptoed toward Aunt Lee's house. As he approached the path near Aunt Lee's place, Chu saw several small, dark shadows standing by the roadside in the dim moonlight. Their shapes were blurry, appearing like 5 small children. He rubbed his eyes and looked more closely, noticing that these figures had pale faces, thin bodies, and were standing together as if performing some sort of ritual, holding thin iron chains. The chains gently clinked with their movements, making an eerie sound in the night. Chu's heart began pounding. He recalled the stories the elders told about soul-locking spirits, ghostly children sent to find those whose time had come, chaining their souls and taking them away. His hands started to tremble at the thought. He raised his oil lamp slightly, trying to see more clearly. The light illuminated the face of one of the spirits. The spirit slowly lifted its head, its hollow eyes staring straight at Chu. That gaze petrified him, his entire body stiffened, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. He suddenly realized that these spirits had faces as pale as paper, expressionless, and seemed unaware of his presence. They continued their low whispers, their chains lightly rattling as if performing some ritual. Then the spirit in front slowly turned and took a step toward Chu, its lifeless eyes locked on him. Chu was so scared that he almost dropped his lamp. He quickly knelt down and began to bow, trembling as he spoke. "If I have offended you, please forgive me." He dared not look further, overwhelmed by fear, bowing repeatedly, praying for the spirits to spare him. His voice grew weaker, and the sound of chains gradually faded. After a while, Chu finally mustered the courage to look up, only to find that the path was empty, as if everything had been a dream. But he knew very well it wasn't. Slowly he stood up, his body still shaking, and returned home. He told everything to his elderly father, who was nearly 80 years old. His father's face grew solemn. After a moment of silence, he sighed. "Q, those were soul-locking spirits. When they appear, they come to take a life. I fear someone in the village will soon pass away." The next morning, bad news spread through the village. Aunt Lee had died suddenly in her home, without any prior illness. She had been healthy, and her sudden death left the villagers shocked. Chu, upon hearing the news, thought of the 5 spirits he saw the previous night, and his back went cold. A deep, indescribable fear spread through his heart. He remembered his father's words, convinced that those spirits had come to lock Aunt Lee's soul. Since then, Chu never dared to go out at night again, nor did he go near the courtyard gate after dark. The villagers, hearing of his experience, also reminded their children to come home early after dusk to avoid encountering the soul-locking spirits wandering at night.
Before the story begins, please click to subscribe to support the channel. The corpse mender is an old and mysterious profession. Their main job is to repair corpses to ensure the dead are buried whole and can rest in peace. This profession exists because, in traditional Chinese culture, people believe that if the body is not complete, the soul cannot rest, and it might even bring misfortune to the family. In ancient times, wars and accidents were common, and bodies were often incomplete, making corpse menders in demand. Master Yang was a famous corpse mender in the city. His skills were excellent, and his reputation spread far and wide. His apprentice, Liu, was also a clever young man. Though young, Liu had learned well under Master Yang, gradually picking up the skills of this unique craft. The work of corpse mending was not glamorous, but Master Yang believed that helping the dead rest peacefully was a virtuous deed. There were many rules in the corpse mending business, especially when receiving a body. According to the old traditions, they must receive the body before sunset and sprinkle yellow beans and black dog blood on it. The yellow beans were meant to scare off spirits, and the black dog blood was believed to drive away evil and prevent negative energy from lingering. This was to help the soul find peace. The person receiving the body must also wear a hat woven from willow branches called the soul hat to help guide the soul back to its place. One evening, Master Yang got a strange job to repair the body of a headless woman. The person who brought the body was a tall, thin, middle-aged man with a pale face and deep eyes that seemed to hold a strange aura. He didn't say much, just handed a bag of silver coins to Master Yang and said he was entrusted by others to bring the body. They hoped Master Yang could fix her so she could be buried properly. Although Master Yang found it strange, he followed the usual rules and prepared to sprinkle the yellow beans and black dog blood. However, as Master Yang poured the dog blood, he noticed that it didn't seep into the ground as usual. Instead, it gathered next to the body, forming a strange symbol. Feeling uneasy, he wanted to take a closer look, but the man hurried him, saying, "They will come to take her away early tomorrow. The family is in a rush to bury her. Can you hurry up?" Seeing the man's insistence, Master Yang decided not to dwell on it and began the mending. The woman's body was also very strange. Her body was well preserved, her skin looking like she had just passed away, with no signs of decay, but she had no head. Even though Master Yang had seen many corpses, this one still made him shiver a bit. After thinking for a while, he decided to use bamboo to make a head-sized frame, wrap it with pigskin, and put a wig on it. This way, from the outside, it looked like a normal head. That night, Master Yang and Liu were busy working in the backyard. The wind outside was howling, mixed with faint cries as if coming from afar. Master Yang felt a chill, but he was used to this kind of work and had built up courage over the years, so he ignored it. Just as they were about to finish making the head, Master Yang suddenly heard someone calling his name in a low voice.
"Master Yang, Master Yang."
The voice was deep and distant, as if coming from underground. Master Yang thought it was Liu and frowned. "Liu, what's going on? Didn't I tell you to get the needle and thread?" No one answered. Only the sound of the wind was around. Master Yang stood up and walked into the house, only to find Liu leaning against the wall, sleeping, with the needle and thread already fallen to the ground. Master Yang patted his shoulder, and Liu woke up groggily. "Master, did you call me?" Master Yang's heart skipped a beat. That voice just now wasn't Liu's. Was it his imagination? He shook his head, thinking maybe he was too tired, and told Liu to keep resting. He returned to the backyard, but when he opened the door, he was stunned. The bamboo head was gone. He clearly remembered placing the head on the woman's neck. How could it disappear in just a blink of an eye? He looked around and found the head in the corner of the yard. The wig had fallen off, and the pigskin was torn, as if something had bitten it. Master Yang felt a chill in his heart. He carefully picked up the head and suddenly felt a cold wind behind him. He seemed to hear a faint cry.
My head. Give me back my head.
Master Young quickly turned around, only to see the woman's body still lying on the table, but her hands had somehow fallen from her chest, as if reaching for something. He was terrified and stepped back a few steps, dropping the bamboo head to the ground. At that moment, the lights in the room suddenly went out, and the entire backyard fell into darkness. Master Yang felt a chill on his back, as if icy hands were on his shoulders. He wanted to call Lu, but his voice was stuck in his throat, and he couldn't make a sound. Just then, a clear bell sound suddenly rang, instantly dispelling the strange power in the darkness, and the coldness gradually faded away. Master Yang quickly lit the oil lamp in his hand and saw an old lady standing at the courtyard door, holding a bell, looking at him sternly.
You young ones really don't know the rules.
The old lady walked up, frowning.
This corpse already has strong resentment. How dare you touch it?
Master Yang was shocked and quickly asked who the old lady was. She sneered.
I am a passing exorcist. I sensed a strong resentment here from afar. This body has deep resentment, and without her head, she cannot rest. If you continue to mend her, you might anger the spirit and cause unforeseen consequences.
The old lady took out a red cloth from her bag and covered the woman's neck, chanting softly. Then she took out a compass, carefully measured, and finally set up a Chimen Dunjia formation in the yard. She used the heaven plate and earth plate method, along with open gate and shut gate, to guide the resentment out of the body. The open gate symbolized guiding the resentment away smoothly, while the shut gate sealed the source of the resentment to prevent it from gathering again. The two worked together, allowing the resentment to dissipate. The black, smoke-like resentment slowly rose from the woman's body, led by the red cloth into the air, gradually fading away. The woman's hands also slowly returned to her chest, and the crying sound gradually disappeared, leaving the spirit at peace. Master Yang dared not delay any longer, quickly packed up his tools, and left the yard with Lu, thinking only about staying far away from this strange body. They decided to come back the next morning to check on things, but needed to avoid the resentment for now. The next morning, Master Yang and Liu gathered their courage and returned to the yard, only to find it empty. The body and the old lady were both gone, as if nothing had ever happened. However, the traces of the Chimen Dunjia formation from last night were still visible on the ground. Master Yang vaguely understood that the old lady had used the secret arts of Chimen Dunjia to guide and seal the resentment, allowing the woman's spirit to rest. This was not an illusion, it was a real struggle between yin and yang. The torn pigskin was still on the ground. Master Yang quickly burned it. From that day on, Master Yang never dared to take on such strange work again. I always thought dating apps like Tinder were a bit strange. The idea of meeting up with a complete stranger just felt off to me, but after my ex-boyfriend ran off with someone else, I was heartbroken, crying every day. My best friend Megan, bless her heart, kept telling me, Casey, you need to move on. You need to start living your life again. So one Friday night after a couple of drinks, I did something I never thought I'd do. I downloaded Tinder. After a couple of drinks, feeling a bit tipsy and curious, I started swiping through the endless profiles. Most of the guys were just not interesting, posing for selfies or flexing their muscles. Nothing really stood out. But then I saw Jack. His profile was different. The picture showed him standing in a forest on the outskirts of LA, half turned towards the camera with a mysterious smile on his face. He had this vibe that was hard to ignore. His bio was short and simple. Outdoor enthusiast, love exploring, looking for a like-minded partner. Without thinking much, I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched instantly. I was a bit shocked, but also excited. Maybe adventure and an unusual date were exactly what I needed. Jack quickly sent me a message to start a conversation. Hey, Casey, judging from your pictures, you look like someone who loves the outdoors too, right? We started chatting. Jack was funny, and he seemed to know everything about the area around LA. He even suggested a few hiking trails and mentioned that he went exploring every weekend. Actually, I'm planning to do a night city exploration this weekend, he said. Interested in joining? I think it could be fun. I frowned. This didn't sound like a typical first date. It honestly seemed a bit strange. Who invites someone on a night exploration on the first date? But Jack was so enthusiastic. He sounded genuine, like a real outdoor guy, and maybe I just didn't understand night explorations. Plus, he mentioned there would be other people joining, and he even showed me their profiles. It made me feel a bit safer. So, after a lot of hesitation, I decided to go. On the night we planned, I put on some comfy jeans and sneakers and drove to the address Jack had sent me, an old warehouse on the eastern outskirts of LA. Honestly, as I got there, my heart started pounding. The place was completely deserted, with no one else around. It was an abandoned industrial area, and the warehouse looked dark and unwelcoming. Jack was standing outside, and when he saw me, he gave me a big smile. He looked even better in person. Tall, handsome, wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, his messy brown hair adding to his charm. "Hey Casey, you made it! I'm so glad you're here." He walked up and gave me a friendly hug. I was a bit stiff, but smiled back at him. Looking around, I didn't see anyone else, which made me feel uneasy. "Where are the others? You said there would be a lot of people," I asked. Jack shrugged, still smiling. "Oh, they had to cancel last minute, but don't worry, I can still show you around. The city at night has a lot of stories to tell." The uneasiness in my gut grew stronger, but Jack seemed so genuine and friendly, I didn't want to come off as scared, so I nodded, trying to hide my hesitation. Jack led me into the warehouse. Inside, it resembled an old office building. There was a big empty hall and a set of broken stairs. It was dead silent except for the sound of our footsteps echoing off the concrete. Jack walked ahead, telling me about the history of the place. He said it used to be a textile factory, but it was abandoned after a big fire. He even claimed that people had seen ghosts wandering around here. I shivered, not sure if he was trying to scare me or just being dramatic. I didn't entirely believe him, but the stories were definitely creepy. We went up to the second floor, and the hallway was narrow and dark, with only a bit of moonlight shining through the broken windows. Suddenly, I smelled something weird, a rotten, musty smell that made me gag. "What's that smell?" I wrinkled my nose and stopped walking. Jack stopped too, turning to look at me with his usual smile. "Oh, probably just some rats. Places like this are always a bit dirty. Don't worry, keep going. I promise there's something really cool up ahead." His smile was still charming, but I started regretting coming here. My instincts were screaming at me to leave. Jack's demeanor suddenly changed, and he grabbed my wrist. His hand was cold and strong, nothing like the gentle guy he seemed before. I think I should go, Jack," I said, trying to stay calm, trying to pull my hand away. But his smile disappeared, replaced by something twisted and terrifying. His eyes grew dark and dangerous, like he had suddenly become someone else. "Don't you want to see the surprise I prepared for you?" he said in a low voice, filled with a kind of suppressed madness. I yanked my hand back, finally breaking free, and turned to run down the stairs. Jack was right behind me, his footsteps echoing heavily in the empty hallway. I ran as fast as I could, practically jumping down the stairs, but just as I was about to reach the first floor, I tripped over a piece of broken flooring and fell hard. Pain shot through my knee, but I couldn't stop. As I struggled to get up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner under the stairs, there was a metal barrel, and inside, I could see bones, even a skull. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, or I was done for. As Jack got closer, I spotted a metal rod on the ground. Driven by sheer panic, I grabbed it and swung as hard as I could. I heard it connect with his body, and he let out a pained yell, falling to the ground. I didn't stop to see how badly he was hurt. I ran out of the warehouse, not stopping until I made it to the street. By then I was crying, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I pulled out my phone and called 911. When the police arrived, I stood across the street, watching as they stormed into the warehouse. I saw them drag Jack out. His face was no longer charming, just hollow and cold. A few days later, I saw the news about Jack on TV. He wasn't just dangerous, he was a monster, a serial killer. He had set up a hunting room in that warehouse, targeting girls he met on dating apps. I was the only one who got away. But the story didn't end there. A few days later, when I was finally starting to feel a bit normal, trying to get my life back, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, a picture of me running out of the warehouse. Underneath, it said, "The adventure is just beginning, Casey. We'll meet again." My heart sank and fear washed over me all over again. I didn't know how he got that photo or if he had an accomplice. But I knew that night, the shadow I saw in the mist might never truly disappear.